Well, hello again and welcome. It's Burt here, and today we're going to be speaking and talking about the 11th chord. In order to understand the 11th, I hope that you understand about the 9th chord and all the other chords below that, your diminished and augmented chords, because the 11th is probably one of the most misunderstood chords. Now, if you're not up to speed on the other chords, please visit my website, www.davidburt.com, and check out the tutorials on those particular chords. So what is an 11th? Well, 11th and a 4th are exactly the same note on the keyboard or piano. Let's prove that. If I go up my F scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, is it 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 4, 11. So the 4th and the 11th are the same note on the piano. So the obvious question becomes, well, which is which? I know a 4th is supposed to be a sus, which usually tends to resolve, and the 11th is the same note. What is the difference? Well, let's see if we can straighten that out. If I'm looking at a dominant chord, let's say a C7 with a C melody, and the chord symbol says C7 sus or C sus, I'll be raising the 3rd to the 4th, and you can hear that it wants to resolve. It has that feeling that it wants to resolve before it moves on. Now, it doesn't have to resolve, but susses usually do. Here I've got the 7th as my melody. Yeah, you get the feeling that it wants to resolve before moving on. However, if the 4th is the melody, 1, 2, 3, 4, changed my whole way of thinking. It now becomes an 11th. And there's a formula involved. It goes 5, 7, whole tone below the root, 9, whole tone above the root, and of course the 4th now becomes the 11. So now the 9 is an extension of the 7, and the 11 is an extension of the 9. So the chord has less tendency to feel that it wants to resolve. It just sounds more like an extended 9th chord. Let's listen to it. It tends to move on to the next chord without resolving. Can it resolve? Of course it can, because any chord can do anything it wants pretty well. It could have done this and then move forward, but usually 11ths go directly to the next chord. Okay, so that's the difference between kind of a sus and an 11th. So a sus has a feeling that it wants to resolve. An 11th is more of an extended 9th chord, has a feeling that it doesn't particularly want to resolve. It's just extended further out than the 9th. Chord symbols, well, that's kind of interesting because publishers tend to not tell you the whole truth. Well, you have to realize that they're in the business to sell music, and when they start putting 11th chord symbols in, somebody might freak out and not buy the music. So they tend to underplay an 11th. They may even call it a sus when it really should be an 11th. And they also do some other little tricks which I'll show you. For example, if I played a C7 chord and asked you what inversion that is, well, if you've watched my other tutorials, you'll know that it's in root position because C is the lowest note you hear. If I were to move that C up to here, ask you what inversion, you'd say, well, it's a first inversion because the 3rd's at the bottom. If we move the E up here, you'd say, well, that's a second A because the 5th is the lowest note you hear. And if I put the G up here and played it this way, you'd say, well, that's a 3rd inversion because a note outside of the triad is the lowest note you hear. But what if I were to take the D, which is the 9th, and put it down here? What inversion is that? Well, the answer is it's not an inversion at all. It's a publisher's way of telling you to play a D11 chord. A D11, you say? How can that be? Well, let's take a look at it. There's my root, there's my 7th, a whole tone below the root, there's my 9th, a whole tone above the root, and of course 1, 2, 3, 4 is my 11. Well, the 5th's missing. Well, sometimes if you realize that you're playing an 11, then you probably will put the 5th at the bottom. If on the other hand the publisher was really bent and determined to get you to play this chord, they may very well give you the chord symbol A minor 7/D in the bass. And in that case, you're actually playing a D11 chord. So whenever you see a triad, such as an E flat, with its 9th, in this case the F at the bottom, It's of course not an E flat chord at all. In this case, it's an F11, 7, 9, 11, and I would probably put 5, 7, 9, 11. If on the other hand, the 11th drops below middle C, which is here, it gets rather rough. In a case like that, the 5th is always a throwaway note, so I could take my 5th out, get rid of the C, and just play it like that. Remember that an 11th as well as a sus are both replacements for any kind of a third, major or minor. Can an 11th be used with a third? Yes, in two circumstances it can. If I were to play an F11, F in the bass, 5, 7, 9, 11, there's my F11 chord. I can turn that into an F minor 11 by throwing out my 5th and reaching down and grabbing my minor 3rd. And there it is. It's a beautiful sounding chord. So that would be referred to as an F minor 11. Minor 3rd, 7, 9, 11. The differential between the minor 3rd and the 11th, of course, is a whole tone. It's also possible to play a major 3rd and an augmented 11th in the same fashion. Here's my major 3rd, here's my plus 11. Used in jazz a lot. Again, the differential between the major 3rd and the plus 11 is a whole tone. But never, never, and you won't hear me saying never, never very often, can you have a major 3rd and an 11th in any configuration. It just doesn't cut it somehow or another. I usually like to voice minor 11ths with a 3rd in a different location from the 11th, but there are people that will have no qualms about putting them right next to one another. I just prefer, personally, I like to separate it, the purity of that sound. So that's basically the story on the 11th chords. Let's just review that an 11th, as well as a sus, is a replacement for all thirds, period. There are two circumstances where you can have thirds. You can have a minor 3rd and an 11th. You can have a major 3rd and an augmented 11th, but never, never, never can you have a major 3rd and 11th. Publishers tend to downplay the 11th chord, and they'll do silly things like here's a D chord with an E at the bottom, which is like the 9th. That would obviously become an E11. In that case, you very well might want to put in the 5th. 5, 7, 9, 11. Anyway, that's the story on the 11th. If you have any questions, visit my website, ask some more questions, get some clarity on this, or even come in for a lesson. Bye-bye for now.